welcome along to another deep dive into my mind in what I've encountered within the music industry. If you're wondering, who's this bloke? What's he all about? I'm a DJ of 35 years on the UK rave scene, in the underground, really. I'm 50 years of age now, and I've managed to somehow carve a career since I was 15 years of age, week in, week out, every weekend, for 35 years. And as well as being a DJ, I've encountered lots of different situations on my journey, from being signed to major record labels to running events both in the UK and all over the world, running a record label, a number of record labels, releasing books as a publishing company. I've been around the block, and at the age of 50, I want to share as many of those stories with you all as I can. If you've not got my book, I will put the link in the description so you can pick it up. Tonight's, there you go, industry story is all about this record, Aerial A9, released on Pete Tong's Essential Recordings label, which was part of FFRR and London Records. And by this point in the year 2000, I was 10 years into my career. I'd started DJing in 1990. The first record I ever produced, actually the first record I ever produced was in 92, which never come out, but the first record that I produced that had come out was late 94. I'd been on lots of mix albums in the mid 90s rave scene. I'd run a couple of record labels up to this point, but this particular deal was far from my biggest rodeo legally, but was a really early rodeo legally. And it's it's a real story of how to treat people or how not to treat people. It's a real story of ego. It's a real story of record industry shadiness, record industry aggression, and then just people you're dealing with being above their stations. Now, this track, Aerial A9, Aerial, absolutely legendary. He used to do like 6 to 9 hour sets at Bagley's. This track was signed from a label called Automatic, where the kind of crux of this story is between the guy who owned that label, Russell Automatic, and myself. Bearing in mind this was 25 years ago, I was only 25 years of age, and any of these stories that I'm going to tell about legal battles, any stories that I've written about in my book or told in other podcasts over the years, I have no animosity against people who have tried to rip me off, people who have belittled me, because 99.99% of the time we come out on top. Also, I'm a 50-year-old man who's had countless amounts of ups and downs in music, and the stage I'm at in my life now, music has rewarded me incredibly. So I'm going to tell you this story from the perspective of what happened when I was 25 years of age between me and that label Automatic, but it's a 50-year-old man telling his story. So basically, my best friend from school, Anthony Atcherley, we grew up together. We're like brothers till this day. He's the person in 85, 86 who got me into house music, birthdays, Christmases, still to this day, you know, continually we speak to each other like brothers on the phone. We go back to the 80s, and we're like brothers to this very day. So in 1998, as well as doing all my rave, old school, hardcore, hard dance, trancecore, whatever you want to call all of the different musics that I was playing, I was also releasing a lot of white labels and a lot of house or harder house or techno stuff or hard dance stuff. And Anthony did this track called In My House, and anyone who's familiar with my hardcore, he did it with Design, who was part of JDS, who was he made Toy Town with Hixie and Sharky, he made Ride Like the Wind with me, and I'd worked very closely with Darren Design. Anthony was my closest friend from school, so they did this white label 98, 99 times, and it blew up. Judge Jules was playing it like every week on Radio 1. The likes of Tall Paul were playing it, Pete Waldman. You know, it was like a real underground club record that was beginning to grow wings. And Judge Jules played it something like 8 or 9 weeks in a row, 10 weeks in a row. And we sold a lot of this white label. And it started to die down. And it lost its buzz. And one weekend I was going to a gig. Anthony was in the car with me. And Radio 1, Judge Jules, they'd stopped playing the record. All of a sudden, Anthony's record come in. And we're in the car driving up the M1 to my gig. And I'm like, that's unusual. Like, because music moved on at such a rapid, quick rate at that time. It was just unusual for a DJ to go back 3 months or 4 months. It weren't really the thing, because Radio 1 was always about new music at the weekend. Oh, so his tune comes in, his beats, his bass, just the entire rhythm track and bass hook come in of Anthony's track. Then all of a sudden, Exit E, Epidemic, come over the top, the riff, and we're like, what? And basically, it was a bootleg of Anthony's tune and the riff of Exit E, Epidemic. And we were like, a bit cheeky. We went and investigated the following week, picked up a copy from the record shop. We tracked it down to this Automatic Records before it was signed to Pete Tong's Essential Recordings. So we've sort of like started the dealings, and after 3 or 4 weeks, because what would happen if a record would blow up as an underground bootleg or white label, and it was becoming a really big track in the clubs or on Radio 1, the chances are, and the goal would always to have been to get signed that dance track or that track signed to a major. So in the meantime of tracking down where this bootleg of our track had come from, Pete Tong's Essential wanted to sign this record from Russell at Automatic. I wouldn't, in this day and age, I wouldn't know what Russell looked like. And like I say, I've got nothing but fond memories of this story, even though at the time I was angry, I was furious. But now it's all part of life. It's all part of the trajectory to get me to where I am now. So Pete Tong wanted to sign this record. And if you watch the podcast that I did with Rob Tessera recently, Rob was also had music being signed to major labels, and he come up with the figure. I remember when I used to get advances for 25 grand a track, and that was the standard in the late 90s, early noughties for a track that was becoming big and then getting signed to a major. They were the figures that were getting bandied about. So Automatic get offered this deal from Pete Tong for 25 grand whilst we're negotiating on this situation of the bootleg press that you've put out. And I was well rehearsed in how much money was in 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 records. Even though I've made no bones in saying I had no real business acumen, I was doing lots of stuff and I was very, very, very active. So I knew how many records were selling, what money was to be made out of records. So he gets this deal on the table, and I want you to understand that 50% of this record is ours. The other 50% of this record, the musicalities, is Exit Epidemic. So Russell has to make us aware. The Automatic Records needs to make us aware that they've been offered this £25,000 advance for what ultimately is half our track. And this is where this story gets really interesting. Russell rings me and says, I'm offering you £1,000. I'm offering you £1,000. In my head, I'm thinking, that don't work. You've been offered 25 grand and you want to give us £1,000 for our 50% share. And I've said, that's not happening, mate. He's turned round to me and said, people like you need £1,000. People like you need £1,000. I advise you to take the £1,000. I went into overdrive. Even though I was only 25, even though I wasn't part of the Ponzi world of the music industry and house and trance, I'd been around 10 years. And I'd been in a world where football hooligans had given me my break as a DJ. I'd grown up around the market stalls of North London, and you don't talk down to people and you don't back down to people, and you certainly, with a posh voice and your music industry way, tell me that someone like me needs £1,000. And also I'd been in a lot of situations in the early days around Dalston, around Tottenham, where I'd had knives held to my throat. I'd had people tell me they're going to cut me and do this to me and blah, blah, blah in my younger days. So someone threatening me over money and what I need and don't need at the age of 25, and with the fire that I had in me, was most certainly not gonna resonate me. And the mad thing is someone threatening to cut you in a boisterous way or the headbutting of lads. I learned after 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of being in the music industry, a whole lot of music industry people, especially those who are cut from the cloth of learning about publishing and contracts and have been to music school and learnt business. Those people are far shadier, cutthroat, nastier than when young men butt heads in arguments. So this guy has said to me, people like you need £1,000. He never knew where I'd come from. He never knew, or if he did know, he hadn't judged me. He'd completely misjudged me and put money and paperwork and the music industry far above what he thought I needed or didn't need. So I had a publisher, Paul Rodriguez, who sadly left us, who was no longer with us. He was mine and Sonia's mentor and taught us everything that we knew about the music industry. Legendary publisher. And Paul had a real soft spot for me and Sonia, and took us under our wing from like when we was like 19, 20 in our late teens, and taught us everything. And Paul was a legal publishing music genius when it come to the ins and outs of paperwork. He'd been around since the late 60s. Him and David Bowie were actually in a band together in the late 60s, early 70s, and he really knew his stuff. And straight away, this Russell guy had really wound me up, telling me and my closest friend from school that people like us needed £1,000 for 50% of our work that he was getting 25 grand from. So I said to Paul, here's what's going on with this track, blah, blah, blah. And I knew the power of Paul. I knew Paul's intelligence on the music industry. He'd had loads of hits already. He'd been around the publishing scene. He'd been around other lawyers. He knew how to play the game that this guy from Automatic thought he was playing. So I've said to this guy, you don't deal with me anymore. You deal with Paul. I want 60% of the money and you deal with this man here. So this guy gets his lawyer to start dealing with Paul. There's 25 grand on the table. I've said how much I want. We don't have to pay Paul. Paul has taken me and Sonia under our wing. This label, Automatic, they have to pay for their lawyer. I was that angry, and Paul knew how angry I was. He literally kept firing legal letters back to this guy, his solicitor team. He ended up phoning me, this guy from Automatic, begging me to make Paul stop because all of his share that he was due for the record he'd spent on fighting Paul against what he wanted for me. So he lost his money that was in his advance by paying a solicitor to fight the person who he said needed his £1,000, which ultimately 12.5 grand of that money was me and my mate from school. And we ended up getting our own way. This guy literally phoned up begging me to make Paul stop. And I just said to this guy, you'll never tell anyone again, will you, what you think that they need when you're telling them that they need this, which is from their own share. And it taught me so much about the music industry. It taught me so much about youthful ego. It taught me so much about how people are willing to not only stitch you up, but tell you they're stitching you up, whilst being a snob about stitching you up and telling you that you're stupid and I'm going to stitch you up. And Sonia always has this rule, and as I get going and tell you more and more stories from the past 35 years, she has a rule that we never ever trouble until trouble troubles us, and we live by that. And when you're as active as I've been, when you're as much music and energy as I am, loads of amazing situations and things come your way just because that's how energy works. But there is always someone there to take advantage of your energy, and we've never ever put up with it, and we've never ever let anyone rip us off. And like I say, it's far from our biggest rodeo when it comes to a legal situation. In fact, it's quite minuscule compared to some of the things that come further down the line. But it was a real lesson in you need to be careful who you're talking to, because you never know legally who someone has around them. You never know how much, like, this is the thing, we don't do this for money, we do this for love and passion. You was doing your thing, you were the one who needed the advance. We didn't care. And the moment you then told us what we needed was the moment you lost all power and put all power into us, because we weren't doing it for the money, and you don't come along and tell us what we need because of how you perceive we talk, or how we walk, or how you think we are. I've said this on a previous deep dive into the music industry. Learn your law, learn what is right. Don't go around belittling people or telling people what they need and don't need if you get into a position of success. Always stand up for yourself. If you're in the right, if your heart is in the right place, because in the music industry, and trust me when I tell you, the music industry as a legal functioning contractual industry is far more dangerous and cutthroat than all the stories that we tell about old school rave promoters and the stories of promoters versus promoters from other areas and stuff like that. It's cutthroat. There's some real unsavoury characters within it. Do what you do with love and passion, but have your eyes wide open that there is going to be people who try and stitch you up, and never bury your head in the sand. Face it head on and do everything with a good heart.